GLC presents, brought to you by the donations of our faithful partners.
Welcome once again to another program. I'm Avi Ben Mordechai. We're talking about the book of Galatians, a most misunderstood book in all of Christendom, but we're here to try to unravel the misunderstood nature of Galatians and deal with the reality of what it's really talking about. On the last program, we were talking about the oral law and the written law of Paul's day. Why? Because Paul, when he was writing Galatians, he had two different sets of laws that were going on at the time. He had Mosaic written law, and he had Torah written law, and rabbinic oral law. Rabbinic oral law and Torah written law. Both laws are defined as law, or they use the same word, nomos. How do you know which is which? How do you know if it's oral law or written law when he uses the word law or nomos? The only way to know is by context. So let's continue on with this understanding here. We're going to give you 5 references here on this slide. Romans 3:20. By the works of the law, no flesh will be justified in his sight. And yet James, Yaakov, in 2:24 says, no, a man is justified by works. But then Paul comes along in Galatians 2:16 and says, no, a man is not justified by works of the law. But then in Romans 2:13, Paul turns around and he says, no, the hearers of the law are just or righteous before God, but the doers of the law will be justified. And then in Acts 13:39, he says, no, you can't be justified through the law of Moses. Doesn't this appear rather confusing to you? Take a look at this in your Brit Hadashah, in your New Testament. Romans 3:20 says, the works of the law, by the works of the law you can't be justified. James says, no, you are justified by the works of the law. Paul then comes along and says, no, you're not justified by the works of the law. But then in Romans 2:13 he says, yes, you are justified by the works of the law. Okay? Because the doers of the law are justified. But then in Acts 13:39 he says, no, you're not justified by the law of Moses. Well, which is it? Will somebody please tell me the truth here? This is very confusing. Or is it? No, it's not confusing at all. What this is referring to, Romans 3:20 is talking about the oral law of Paul's day under Gamaliel, according to Acts, the book of Acts, chapter 22, verse 3. That's the oral law. The written law is talking about in James 2:24. The oral law is in Galatians 2:16. The written law is in Romans 2:13. The oral law is in Acts 13:39. Here you have oral, written, oral. And it's referencing these in one right after another. What is Paul getting at? He's just simply referencing the fact that there are different kinds of Torah. Okay? Man-made Torah, divine Torah. Which one are you following? So now we want to go to the oral Torah that Paul knew. And it included the following: studied, knowledgeable understanding that he was taught under Gamaliel. And Paul knows this back then because we even know this today. This hasn't changed much in 2,000 years. Not at all. Here are 2 major factors that you need to understand if you are going to understand the book of Galatians. 2 major things. And it would do you well to make a note and write this down. In Exodus 23:2, you learn the following. You shall not follow a multitude in doing evil, nor shall you testify in a dispute so as to incline after a majority in order to pervert justice. The text of the Torah of Moses says, do not pervert justice by following a multitude in doing evil, and don't testify in a dispute in order to incline after a majority in order to pervert justice. Don't do that. Rabbinic oral law, under the interpretations of the rabbis, take these 2 concepts and they cross out everything that's irrelevant, and they arrive at the principle, incline after a majority. In Hebrew, acharei rabim lehatot. Acharei rabim lehatot. This is inclining after a majority. Exodus 23:2. That's how they get it. And then there's a second principle you need to know about, and that is called, it is not in heaven. Lo bashamayim hi. Lo bashamayim hi. Now the biblical law, that is divine law coming from the all-eternal one of Israel, in Deuteronomy 30 verses 11 through 12 says the following. For this commandment which I command you today is not too difficult for you. It's not out of reach. It's not in heaven, that you should say, who will go up to heaven for us to get it and make us hear it so that we can observe it? Well, what is that all about? That's the text. In other words, the written instructions, the divine law of Moses, is easily done. It can be done. It's not difficult at all. And you don't have to send a messenger to go get it for you. You can get it. You can do it. It's a piece of cake. It's easy. However, rabbinic instruction, rabbinic interpretation, takes this passage, turns it around, and removes all the irrelevant portions of the text to only make it say, it is not in heaven. Lo bashamayim hi, in Hebrew. What is, it is not in heaven? What does that mean? It means that the Torah of Moses is no longer in heaven. It's on earth. And if it's on earth, then with whom is it on earth? Well, we know it is in the hands and the mouths of the majority. That's our slide. In other words, if the law is not in heaven, it's on earth. If it's on earth, it's in the mouths of the majority. And who are the majority? Not you or I. No. It's the rabbis. And so we understand the following text here from incline after the majority. Let's go to our next slide. This is coming from a very famous rabbi of the 12th century. His name is Moshe ben Maimon. Okay? Moshe ben Maimon. He is nicknamed, if you will, Rambam. Rambam. Now, Rambam writes the following. If there are 1,000 prophets, all of them of the stature of Elijah and Elisha, giving a certain interpretation, and 1,001 rabbis giving the opposite interpretation, you are to incline after the majority. And the law is according to the 1,001 rabbis, and not according to the 1,000 venerable prophets. And thus our sages said, by God, if we heard the matter directly from the mouth of Joshua the son of Nun, that's Moses' right-hand man, we would not obey him, nor would we listen to him. The principle of incline after the majority in Paul's day, in the doctrines of rabbinic Judaism of Paul's day, and also today, by the way, the primary doctrine here is that of a majority, which is twisted from Exodus 23, verse 2. What is this basically saying? That if you were to have 1,000 prophets, even as much as like Elijah and Elisha, and you were to compare what they're interpreting, their interpretations, with that of 1,001 rabbis, you are forbidden to go with the 1,000 prophets, all of them that are doing things like Elijah and Elisha, that are interpreting like them. In other words, Elijah and Elisha and those kinds of people, they're worthless. The 1,001 rabbis take precedence. That's the principle of incline after the majority. You follow the rabbis. And the principle, it is not in heaven, is our next section. Continuing on with the Rambam's introduction, he says the following. The sages said further, if a prophet testifies that the Holy One, blessed be he, told him that the law of a certain commandment is such and such, or that the reasoning of a certain sage is correct, that prophet must be executed. As it is written, it is not in heaven. Lo bashamayim hi. It comes from Deuteronomy 30, verse 12. Thus God did not permit us to learn from the prophets, only from the rabbis, who are men of logic and reason. Logic and reason, by the way, is the basis of all Greek thought. The Greeks were into logic and reason. That was their whole position in discussions in life. Okay? So this basically says the following. Lo bashamayim hi. That if you have prophets who come, or people who come and speak in the name of Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh, and they were to say to the rabbis or to the rabbonim or to the rabbinut or to the rabbinic authority of the day, Rabbi, that's not a correct interpretation. That's simply not correct. Or you were to say, that is correct, Rabbi. It doesn't matter whether you are saying in the name through the rabbinic authority that is correct or that's incorrect. It matters not. The fact is, if you're speaking and you're saying that is correct or that's not correct, and you're doing it with the authority of heaven, if you're doing it with the authority of heaven, you, as a messenger of the name of heaven, you must be executed by rabbinic oral law. A prophet would be executed. No wonder Yeshua said in Matthew 23:37, Jerusalem, Jerusalem, who kills the prophets and stones those who are sent to her. Because prophets speak in the name of heaven. And remember, it is not in heaven, according to rabbinic Judaism. Thus, prophets must die. Why do you think they killed Yeshua? From the divine perspective, it was a whole different story. But from the natural earthly perspective, the reason that Yeshua was killed was because he was prophesying written Mosaic Torah law and correcting their interpretations. And they were saying, no good, we don't buy your interpretations. Therefore, because it is not in heaven, you must die. And they tried, and they succeeded in having Yeshua killed, because from the natural position, Yeshua was prophesying. And he was not allowed to prophesy. He was not allowed to speak about Mosaic law and interpret the law, because it is not in heaven. Because Yeshua was acting as the role of the Messianic prophet. Okay? So therefore, we have to continue on with the next slide, which is here from Deuteronomy 30:11 through 12. Now, notice what Yeshua says. In Yochanan, in John 6:41 through 45, the Jews therefore were grumbling about Yeshua, because he said, I am the bread that came down out of heaven. It is written in the prophets, and they shall be taught of Elohim. You see, the prophets teach us about God. The prophets teach us about Elohim. That's what the whole Hebrew Scriptures, the Tanakh, is all about. But everyone who has heard and learned from the Father comes to me. He is saying that he was the prophet like Moses, from Deuteronomy chapter 18, verses 15 through 19. Yeshua was teaching as the prophet like Moses. And as a result of what the oral law of Judaism of Paul's day and of Yeshua's day, as a result of what the oral law said, when it says, it is not in heaven, therefore, they were able to authorize the killing of Yeshua, because he was prophesying. And that is coming from Deuteronomy 30:11 through 12, on the principle, it is not in heaven. So now let's go to Matthew 21:23 through 27. Here is a story when Yeshua had come into the house or the temple. The chief priest and the elders of the people came to him as he was teaching, and they said, by what authority are you doing these things? Who gave you this authority? Yeshua said, okay, I'll answer your question if you'll first answer me. He says, the immersion of John, Yochanan, the baptism of Yochanan. Where was that from? From heaven or from men? Now watch this carefully. They started reasoning among themselves, and they said, well, if we say from heaven, he will say, then why didn't you believe him? In other words, John was acting like a prophet, speaking in the name of heaven. And they were saying, we're not going to accept John's testimony because he's speaking in the name of heaven. And they were scared to death, because the rest of the text says, but if we say for men, we're fearing the multitude, for they all hold John to be a prophet. In other words, either they're going to get killed by the all-eternal one, or they're going to get killed by the people, because they don't accept prophecy. You see? It's prophecy because it's not in heaven. If it's not in heaven, then where is it? It's on earth. If it's on earth, where is it? In the mouth of those who are the majority. From a twisted reading of Exodus 23 verse 2, meaning the rabbis. And so, that was Paul's day. But today we have similar problems. We have ecclesiastical, liturgical, church law. And the pastors are saying, you will listen to me. We're the authority. And they are usurping the authority of Moses, and hence usurping the authority of Yeshua, who taught the Mosaic law. So they hold John to be a prophet. So as a result, in Yeshua's day, what do they say? They come back to Yeshua and they say, well, we don't know. And Yeshua says, well, neither am I going to tell you by what authority I do these things. Why? Because they would not accept his authority, because he was speaking in the name from heaven, just like John or Yochanan. That's the whole point. That's why they killed Yeshua, for prophesying Mosaic written Torah instruction. And so let's go to Paul and the oral law. That is Paul and the oral Torah. This is very simple. In the written scriptures of Moses, we have a lot of wonderful teachings. But here in the oral traditions and man-made religion and rules and regulations that Paul was so familiar with, in the Mishnah called Pirkei Avot, the chapters of the fathers, we learn this. Moses received the Torah at Sinai and transmitted it to Joshua, Joshua to the elders to the prophets to the men of the great synagogue, that is Ezra and Nehemiah. The latter used to say three things: be patient in the administration of justice, rear many disciples, and make a fence, what's called a siag, around the Torah. This is oral law. Now watch what happens in Ephesians 2:14 through 15. Okay? Yeshua is the shalom of both houses of Israel, the house of Judah, the house of Israel, according to Jeremiah chapter 3 and many, many, many other places, even Ezekiel chapter 37. Yeshua is this shalom who brings both houses of Israel together into one unit. Paul says so. And he goes that Yeshua broke down the barrier of the siag. That's the Aramaic word for the fence or the boundary. The siag, the fence. Yeshua broke down the barrier of the siag or the fence by abolishing in his flesh the enmity. That is the law of commandments contained in ordinances, that he might make the two into one new man, establishing shalom. Whenever you read Ephesians chapter 2, verses 14 through 15, do not make the mistake of thinking this is breaking down and destroying the Bible of the Mosaic law, the Mosaic contract. Don't make that mistake. You're misunderstanding it if you do. The context is breaking down the dogma, the rules, the regulations, the man-made traditions, the regulations like Colossians chapter 2, verse 8. Study that out. Colossians 2, verse 8. The context is destroying the enmity. The enmity, that is man-made rules, regulations, and traditions. But Torah law coming down out of Moses' hand, from divine hand, that's divine law. That's not man-made. And that's not what this is talking about. It's not talking about destroying man-made. It's not talking about destroying divine law, but man-made law. That's the whole point. The man-made law is the enmity in Ephesians 2, 14 through 15. And that's why you are being built on the apostles and the prophets and the sent ones, because they were the ones teaching divine, holy, Mosaic contract law. Okay? And so in Galatians 3:10, we come to this next slide here, and it says the following. For those who are the works or servants or works of the law are still under a curse. For it's written, cursed is everyone who does not act on all that is written in the book of the Torah, the book of the law. You see, normally you look at something like this, and maybe your pastor or your friend or your people out in your church groups, you take a look at these things and you don't read what's going on. You just skim it. But look at it. Those who are of the works of the law, okay, they're under a curse still. Why? Paul says, for it is written. That's the context. It is written. Paul is juxtaposing the ideas of something that is written with something that is not written. And he's saying, no, this is talking about what you're not doing. In other words, when you normally read this kind of a text, you can get the strong impression that you're damned if you do and damned if you don't. You're cursed if you do and you're cursed if you don't. That's what this text appears to say when you look at it under its normal interpretation. However, when you understand that this is about oral law, you're under a curse if you do rabbinic oral law. You're under a curse if you do man-made rules and regulations of the church and all that other stuff. But you are under a blessing if you do what is written. Because it says, cursed is everyone who does not act on all that is written in this book of the Torah, which comes from Deuteronomy 27:26, as it was written by Moses. However, the rabbis had taught, and always still do teach to this very day, my son, be careful concerning rabbinical decrees even more than the Torah. The Torah, that is the Mosaic law, contains prohibitions, but anyone who violates a rabbinical decree is worthy of death. That's why they were trying to kill Paul. That is, Gamaliel and the elders and all the people. They were sending out men and teams to go look for Paul, chase him down, and try to kill him because he was teaching against rabbinic law. No, Paul did not convert and become a Christian. Please stop that nonsense. That is nonsense. Paul did not become a Christian. He became a written Torah, Mosaic covenant man. He was following what the Bible says and what Moses said and what Yeshua said. That's all written law. He didn't become a Christian. He became a non-rabbinic teacher. And that's why the rabbis of his day and the scholars, including Gamaliel in Acts chapter 23, verse 2, and following, that's why they were trying to kill him. Because he was embarrassing Gamaliel in Jerusalem. He was embarrassing the rabbinic oral law system. He was cutting it down. And when he violates their law, they come after him. And they did. And so in Galatians 4:22 through 23, in Galatians 4:22 through 23, we're going to just come to one very, very simple passage. That is over here where it says the symbolism between two covenants that Paul talks about. One from Mount Sinai that gave birth to bondage, which is Hagar. There's two covenants. There is a slave woman and there is a free woman. What's that all about? Slave woman, free woman? Come back to me here. Let's talk about this. The slave woman and the free woman. What's it all about? The slave woman is the concept of Hagar from Genesis chapters 15 and Genesis chapter 16. The free woman is Genesis chapter 18. Write that down. The slave woman goes to Genesis chapters 15 and 16, and Genesis chapters 18 is the free woman. In short, you would ask the question, did Mount Sinai give birth to bondage? Remember, there's two covenants here in Galatians. The answer is this. And I'm going to bring these up on the screen here so you can see. You go to the top of the mountain in order to receive the written Torah. That's what Moses did. He went in Deuteronomy 28, verse 13. From all those verses, it says in the text of the Torah, if you go to the top and receive the written Torah, you will be above and not below. You'll be the head and not the tail. But if you're down below in base camp, remember what happened with Moses. When he was on top of the mountain getting the Torah, what was going on at base camp? Do you remember? That was the idolatry, where the people were saying, come, make a God who will go before us. Come, make a God. We don't know what happened to Moses. They threw Moses away at base camp. That is likened to the slave woman below. That's likened to Hagar with Sarah and Abraham trying to help God out. Come back to me here. That's like saying, God, we want to help you out. The rabbis, the church, they all do the same thing. They try to help God out. They want to help him, and they want to get rid of Moses. That makes you a slave woman like Hagar, and that is what Mount Sinai gave birth to, was bondage. Mount Sinai does in fact give birth to bondage, and she is in slavery with her children in Jerusalem today. That is rabbinic oral law, the stuff of Paul's day. That is even of today. In church law and ecclesiastical law, that's stuff that Paul never knew anything about. Okay? Because it was much later on, after Paul. The bottom line is these two covenants. The top of the mountain is the free woman. The base camp is the slave woman. And these two ideas are the golden calf and the written Torah. Both covenants did, in fact, come from Sinai. That's the point. So he talks about the two covenants, and Mount Sinai does, in fact, give birth to bondage. Do you understand that? But it's not the bondage from the written Torah above. No, it's the oral law, and it's the law of throwing away Moses down below. That is the two covenants that is talked about in Galatians 4:24. And so with that, I conclude my very, very brief, very quick overview of Galatians and how you should understand the book of Galatians. And I have an entire commentary, verse by verse, through Galatians. A commentary, verse by verse here. And I go through 400 pages of every verse to explain it. I also do it on the DVD, 6 hours on here. And you can go through chapter divisions and everything and study it. We also have a commentary here, a small pocket edition. These things, I hope, will be of great benefit for you. But one thing that you really need to pay attention to are the two principles that are at the basis of understanding the letter of Paul to the Galatians. And that is, lo bashamayim hi, it is not in heaven, and acharei rabim lahatot, or follow the majority. Incline after the majority. Okay? So you incline after the majority because it is not in heaven. Meaning the law, the interpretation. It is not in heaven. Paul, Shaul, was very, very keen and very understanding of this whole concept of oral law and written law in his day. But remember, back in Paul's day, that comes a long time before ecclesiastical church law begins to take effect. But so today's church, today's Christian church, is not a first century New Testament church. It is a 4th century Constantinian church coming out of Catholicism and its daughter, Protestantism. The Protestant church is the daughter of Babylon. It's the daughter of the Catholic Church. I'm sorry, I hate to be so bold, but that's the truth. And you can take it and do what you want with it, but I speak truth here. Protestantism is nothing more than the daughter of Babylon. You need to come back to the written Mosaic contract, come back to the Torah law, come back to Galatians, come back to the Magna Carta of the Mosaic law, and get back under the law. Get back into truth. Get back under the concepts of what covenant is all about, lest if you do not, you will have no inheritance with Bnei Yisrael. Okay? And if you want to be part of Bnei Yisrael, the house of Israel, and the restoration of the two houses, according to Ezekiel 37, you must return to Torah. You must, or you'll have no part with it. I hope to see you soon. In the future, email us at our address. Go to our website, m7000.com. I look forward to hearing from you if you have any questions or comments. And of course, remember, He loves you so much. He just wants to see. The All-Eternal One wants to see you come into the understanding of all of these things, okay? Be blessed, and remember, you are loved, and you do have a wonderful blessing in the future. Take care. I'm Avi Ben Mordechai.